In today's video, we're going to cover how to make neo boom bap. I'm going to show you tips on sound selection, sound design tricks for that boom bap sound, drum pattern ideas, and a lot more. Plus, I have a special contest announcement where you can win a lot of money using your beat making skills. More on that later on in this video. Anyways, let's get into it. And what makes these types of beats so unique is the blend of classical boom bap ideas with modern ones, but how you put this together really matters, so let's go over this. But before we start, if you could do me a favor, if my videos have ever done you any good, please do think about hitting like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and if you ever get tired of my videos, you can just unsubscribe. Alright, so I'm going to start off by grabbing a classic boom bap sound, an electric piano. And we'll make a pattern using this sound. A couple of things that I want to point out. First, the sound already has a nice amount of static on it, which helps introduce that rougher old school feel. But if you prefer to use sounds that come from a plugin, it can help to add your own static recording into your beat as a way to create this same type of feel. And when you look at this pattern, you'll notice that we didn't create a highly complex pattern. Instead, we just have a short repetitive loop. This is often how these neo boom bap beats are made, so don't be afraid to be a little bit more simple with your loops when you're making these kinds of beats. So what I'm going to do next is print the audio version out of this loop and use that instead. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because you'll notice if I play the full loop, we have that note that carries over. And this isn't a bad thing by any means, but a small detail that we can introduce is to use the printed version of this loop and let this version cut itself off. Now you can hear we no longer have that last note carrying over as we loop back to the beginning. It gets cut off now. This helps this loop sound more like a sample that we chopped up from a song rather than a pattern that we've built ourselves. It's just a small detail that you can think of using for that more classic feel. So now that we have this classic boom bap layer done, let's add in our modern layer next. And we can do this by using some modern tools and effects. One of my go-tos is the crystallizer. This can help you create an experimental version of whatever you add it onto, basically. It's just a really cool effect, and it's not one that we would use in a classic beat, of course. This is the component of our beat that will be more modern. But let's open up Edison and record this as a sample as well. Now I'm recording this as a sample for a different reason this time. You probably heard that this effect can be pretty chaotic. We have different layers playing at different pitches in the different spaces in the stereo field. So by printing this layer out, it will help me just simplify this layer by focusing only on what's happening on the right channel. This monoed version sounds far less chaotic and far more usable. Next, let's bring this sample into a sampler and chop it up so we can control it even more. I'm also going to add on Portal. This is yet another great plugin to introduce some more modern experimentation into your beat. And here is how the layer sounds now. Alright, so that sounds great. And just like that, we have a blend of classic and modern boom bap. That first layer has a very classic feel, while the second layer provides that more modern feel to the beat. Let's move on to the low end of our beat next. Now, one detail in many neo boom bap beats is they often have multiple bass tones, some of which are weak and others of which are strong. So let's start with the weak bass tone first. Now I could grab an actual bass sample, but instead I'm going to duplicate our sound that we've been using so far. And I'm going to use this sound at a lower octave, and that's going to be what I use to create a weaker bass tone. Using a sound that isn't actually meant to be a bass and just pitching it down can be a great way to introduce a different kind of bass tone rather than using an actual bass, which might require you to do some additional sound design just to weaken it or change it. And you'll also notice that I use the slide note here. This is meant to mimic a bass guitar slide, just a small detail that you can think of using if you want to introduce a more organic bass feel. And next, let's bring in our stronger bass tone. And I want to point out again, like I mentioned, I'm not necessarily trying to create an intricate, complex pattern like this one here. Depending on how raw and stripped down you want your beat to sound, just creating a simple pattern might be a better fit for what you're trying to make. Now I want to point out, so far I've been using sounds from my own boom bap sound pack, the boom bap box. So let's talk about this contest where you can win some money. Here's how it works. Step 1 is to use the boom bap box to make a beat, which is available at boombapbox.com, of course. Link is in the description. Now the beat that you make doesn't have to be a boom bap beat. You can make any kind of beat you want, and you don't have to make the entire beat using sounds from the actual pack, but you do need to use a minimum of at least 3 sounds. Step 2, once you've finished your beat, go back to boombapbox.com and click on the button at the top of the page. Then step 3, just fill out the form. Tell me what your producer name is, what sounds you used from the actual boom bap box, a link to your beat, and what email you used to buy the actual pack. So this is a warning: if you pirated the pack and you end up winning, no prize money for you. I will be double checking to see who actually bought the pack before deciding the winner. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to be judging to see who made my favorite beat. The deadline is April 25th, and I'll make a full video announcing the winners, playing their beats for everyone, and sharing their social medias and all that stuff. All right, so let's get back to the beat. Let's finish this loop up by adding in some drums. We'll start off with a kick here. And you can see I created a rubber banding pattern where the kick starts on grid, and then partway through it becomes a bit more loose and off grid, and then it bounces back to being tight and on grid by the end of the pattern. We'll add in our snares next. I'm going to use 2 snares and layer them on top of each other just to thicken up that sound. And now the hi-hats. You'll notice with the hi-hats, I have a sort of up and down pattern where I change the velocities, and we don't have a consistently present hi-hat throughout an entire loop here. And I did this partly by removing the hi-hats whenever I had one of those additional kicks playing. The reason why this works is because the kicks have a good amount of color, so we don't hear those gaps in the hi-hat pattern as long as we have one of those kicks playing. Again, just another idea that you can use. Now that we have the loop done, let's move on to the arrangement. We'll split these sounds into individual patterns just to make this easier to work with. And using what we've built already, we have a verse, but for the hook, I want to do something a bit different. I'm going to create a sort of anti-hook where the energy of the beat drops instead of picking up, but I don't want to be lazy about this. I always see people just delete their drums for their hooks and just call it a day, but let's put some extra effort in and figure out how we can manipulate this loop in a more interesting way. So we'll start with our first pattern here, and we'll create a slightly different pattern. I'm also going to pitch this up an octave. Now for the second layer that we built here, that more modern layer, instead of using what's in the right channel, I'm going to open up that stereo separator and use what's in the left channel instead. That's just going to be a quick and easy way to get something different. And one of the things that happens when you delete the drums from your beat is that the loop can feel a bit more empty. And the reason why this happens is because we have far less rhythm since we removed the drums. So let's figure out a way to reintroduce the rhythm in a different way. So I'm going to go into the ear candy folder in the boom bap box, which many people say is their favorite part of the pack. I'll grab this sound here and do some reshaping. This will allow me to take a longer sample like this and just really control the length of each note. Then I'll create a short stabby pattern that has a lot of repetition, and this helps me reintroduce some of that rhythm that we no longer have since we removed the drums from this section. And I'll also throw in yet another short repetitive sound, again as a way to add in more rhythm. But with what we built so far, we have a problem. There's a pretty big imbalance in this loop right now. We can hear with all the changes and additions that we made, most of the sounds sit in the higher end. So let's go back into our sound pack and use an organ. That would be a great sound to help solve this problem of empty frequencies. Let's also include that bass tone that we came up with and reintroduce it back in, albeit with a different placement this time. All right, so now let's hear how this whole area of the beat sounds. That sounds much more interesting than just removing the drums and calling it a day for the hook. Next, I'll make some smaller changes to the verse sections and whatnot, but overall, we have ourselves a neo boom bap beat here. If you liked the video, please do think about hitting like and subscribe, and check out boombapbox.com if you want to join that contest. I also have my free drum kit that's available in the description box below, and that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys next week.